The alarm in the review chamber cut through every conversation at once, and I remember the exact second the room went quiet, because that silence has never fully left me. I am an analyst for the Vantrell Assessment Bureau, and my only task that cycle was to watch a piece of footage and prove it was false. That was the whole job. Watch it, find the trick, write the word fabricated, and let the committee move on to the next report. Humans were new to us then, barely a few cycles into contact, still learning where to stand during greetings and which words meant welcome and which meant warning. Nobody believed a species that young could do what this footage claimed to show. The clip was short, 11 seconds. A human stood alone on an open ridge on one of their border colonies, while a Krethal strike drone dropped out of the clouds toward a cluster of homes behind them. The drone was fast, armed, and built to punch through concrete. Every projection said the human would run, or fall, or simply disappear in the blast. The human did not run. The human lifted both arms as the drone closed the last stretch of sky, and somehow, impossibly, stopped it. Not with a weapon, not with armor we could detect, with their own two hands. Analyst Ochu, who sat beside me and had reviewed more footage than anyone in the building, barely glanced at the screen before speaking. "Fake," he said. "A rendered composite. No living body survives that kind of impact." "Fake," the rest of the committee agreed, one voice after another. The word passed around the table like something polite you say to end a conversation quickly. I agreed too, at first. Agreeing was easier than the alternative, and it was, after all, my job to find the flaw. So I did what I always did with suspicious footage. I ignored the polished broadcast copy that had been shared across every network on our side of the border, and I pulled the raw sensor feed instead, the one nobody edits, because compression hides truth and a raw feed cannot lie the same way. I zoomed into the exact frame of contact, expecting to find the small errors that always give a fake away. A joint bending the wrong way, light landing where no light should land. Instead, I found the human's hands. At full resolution, you could see the skin tear where the drone's frame met the human's palms. You could see a wave move backward through the arms on impact, a wave that should have broken every bone from the fingers to the shoulders in a single instant. The Bureau's translation software flagged the sound the human made as vocalization consistent with acute distress. This was not the smooth, painless motion of something built inside a machine. This was a body being hurt by the very thing it refused to release. The drone did not simply stop. Its weight kept moving, and that weight had to go somewhere. I watched the human's boots carve two long grooves through solid ground as they were pushed backward, step by step, still holding on, still refusing to let the machine finish its path toward the homes behind them. And still, through all of it, the arms did not open. "Play it again," I said, and for the first time since I had joined the Bureau, my voice did not sound like the careful, flat voice we were trained to use. We watched together as the human forced the drone's nose to turn, just far enough that when it finally struck the ground, it missed the settlement entirely and came down instead on the open ridge where the human still stood. It was Ochu who finally said the thing none of us wanted to admit out loud. "That is not augmentation," he said quietly. "There is no hum, no field distortion, no power signature of any kind. That is only tissue, only a body, doing that, with nothing behind it but will." I could not stop myself from pulling the settlement's medical records after that. I told myself it was for the report. In truth, I wanted to know the name of the person we had all just spent an hour calling a special effect. I wanted to know if they were still alive. They were. The record listed 3 separate surgeries to repair the damage to both arms, and a note from the attending physician that read almost like a complaint. Patient discharged themselves against medical advice. Stated reason given. Work begins again in 2 days. I filed my report that night, and for the first time in my career at the Bureau, I did not write the word fabricated. It took me 3 attempts to write what I actually meant, because the translation software kept flagging my sentences as exaggeration and asking me to soften them. I told it, each time, to leave the words as they were, because they were accurate. "Current threat classification is insufficient," I wrote. "This species does not appear to calculate the cost of a decision before making it. In many cases, they calculate the cost afterward, if they calculate it at all." The committee did not fully accept my report. Ochu did, quietly, but the wider Bureau filed it as an outlier, a single strange event from a species too new to understand fully. That might have been the end of it, one troubling video buried under 1,000 routine ones, if a second clip had not arrived 6 days later from an entirely different colony, showing an entirely different human doing something with the same impossible shape. This time it was not a drone. It was a transport vehicle that had lost control on a supply road, sliding toward a group of children who had wandered too close to the route during a delivery run. A woman named Grace, according to the colony's own public records released afterward, was walking nearby with nothing but a tool bag over her shoulder. She dropped the bag and placed herself between the sliding vehicle and the children. She did not stop the vehicle the way the first human had stopped the drone. She could not have. The mass was too great, the speed too high, and any sensible model would have predicted she simply be struck along with everyone she was trying to protect. Instead, in the 2 seconds available to her, she grabbed the nearest child, turned her own body to take the force of the impact across her back and shoulder rather than let it reach the smaller frame in her arms, and used the last half-second to shove both of them clear of the vehicle's path. The vehicle missed the other children by less than a body's width. Grace did not miss it. The footage showed her go down hard, rolling twice before coming to a stop against a low wall, the child still held against her chest the entire time. When I pulled her medical record, it showed a fractured shoulder, several cracked ribs, and a note stating she had asked, before receiving any treatment for herself, whether the child was breathing normally. I brought both clips to the committee together this time, side by side on the same screen, and I asked them to explain how 2 humans from 2 different colonies, who had likely never met, had each made the same choice under the same kind of pressure, at the same terrible cost to their own bodies. Nobody in the room used the word fake that day. What followed was the beginning of something the Bureau had never done before for any species in 300 cycles of contact. A full doctrinal review, not of human weapons, not of human ships, but of human behavior itself. I was assigned to lead it, mostly because I was the only analyst willing to keep watching footage that made my hands shake while I worked. Over the following weeks, I reviewed dozens of similar records, gathered from colonies, border posts, and even a handful of civilian settlements. Most were smaller than the 2 clips that started everything. A man named Peter who stayed behind in a flooding transit tunnel to guide 3 strangers to a rescue ladder, giving up his own place in line until the water reached his shoulders. A young worker named Alice who climbed onto unstable scaffolding during a structural failure, not to save equipment, but because she had heard a coworker call for help and could not locate him by voice alone through the noise, so she went looking floor by floor until she found him. A retired teacher named Edward who stood in the doorway of a burning maintenance shed, refusing to let panicked colonists trample each other trying to escape through one narrow exit, directing them out 2 at a time until he himself was the last one through. None of these people had special equipment. None of them had training that our own systems would classify as combat-ready. What they had, over and over again in record after record, was the same strange refusal to walk away from someone who needed them, even when every rational measure said the cost would be too high. I began to understand, slowly and uncomfortably, that the 2 viral clips had not shown us an unusual human. They had shown us an ordinary one, caught on camera during an ordinary day that had suddenly asked something extraordinary of them. The committee wanted numbers, because numbers were what the Bureau trusted. So I built numbers. I compared human response times to the average response times of 6 other species during comparable emergencies. Humans were not faster. Their instincts were not better tuned. Their bodies were, if anything, more fragile than several species we had already classified as low physical threat. What set them apart was not speed or strength. It was a willingness to spend everything they had, without pausing first to check what everything was worth. Ochu, who had become something like a partner in the review rather than a skeptic of it, put it more simply than my reports ever managed. He said that most species, including our own, run a quiet calculation in the background of every dangerous moment, a calculation of risk against reward, of self against other, of what might be lost against what might be gained. Humans seemed to run that calculation too, he said, but only after they had already acted. The decision came first. The cost came later, sometimes far too late, and sometimes not until they were lying in a hospital bed explaining to a doctor why they needed to leave 2 days early for work that could easily have waited. We presented the full review to the Bureau's senior counsel 4 weeks after the first video had landed on my desk. I stood in front of representatives from every major member species and told them plainly that our existing threat models were not simply incomplete when it came to humans. They were built around the wrong question entirely. We had been asking how strong is this species, how fast, how well armed. The better question, I told them, was how far will this species go? And the honest answer, based on everything I had reviewed, was that we did not yet know where that line sat, because every human we studied kept moving it further than the one before. One counselor asked whether this made humans dangerous. I told her the truth, which was that it made them both the safest possible neighbor and the most alarming possible opponent, depending entirely on which side of that ridge you happened to be standing on when the sky opened up. Another counselor asked what would happen to relations between our peoples now that this behavior had been documented and studied so thoroughly. I did not have a clean answer for that one, not then. What I had instead was a decision. I requested a transfer to the Human Liaison Office, a small and, at the time, mostly overlooked department that handled routine contact between our administrators and human colony representatives. Ochu thought I had lost my mind. Perhaps I had. But I had spent a month studying people who ran toward danger without asking permission from their own fear first, and I found I no longer wanted to spend my career simply watching that from a safe distance and writing reports about it. My first real assignment in the new office took me, for the first time, to one of the border colonies myself. I met Grace in person 11 weeks after the second video had first crossed my desk. Her shoulder had healed into a shape that still ached in cold weather, she told me, and she still worked the same supply route where the accident had happened, because the route needed someone, and she had never seen a good reason to let a bad memory decide who that someone would be. I asked her, carefully, the question I had been building toward across a month of reports and reviews and sleepless analysis sessions. I asked her what she had been thinking in the 2 seconds before the vehicle reached her. She looked at me for a long moment, the way you might look at someone who had asked something so obvious it barely made sense as a question. Then she said, quite simply, that she had not been thinking at all. There had been a child too close to something moving too fast, and after that there had been nothing to think about, only something to do. I asked whether she had been afraid. She said she had been afraid every day since, replaying it, wondering what would have happened if she had been a half-second slower, or turned the wrong way, or hesitated even briefly. In the actual moment itself, though, there had been no room left over for fear. Fear needed time to work, she said, and she simply had not given it any. I thought about that answer for a long time afterward, on the transport home and for many nights after that. Our species, and most of the species we had contact with, treated fear as something that arrived first and had to be pushed through or overcome. For at least some humans, in at least some moments, fear seemed to arrive only after the decision had already been made, standing quietly at the back of the line behind action, waiting its turn. The Bureau's final classification report, issued 2 months after I first zoomed into that 11-second clip, did not use the word threat anywhere in its summary, though earlier drafts certainly had. It used a term that had never appeared in a species assessment before, one that I proposed and that, to my surprise, the senior counsel accepted without significant argument. The term was reflexive sacrifice, and the definition attached to it read, in part, that certain individuals within human populations demonstrate a consistent willingness to accept severe personal cost in defense of others, occurring at a speed that precedes deliberate risk calculation, and occurring across a wide range of unrelated individuals and circumstances, suggesting the behavior is neither rare nor isolated, but represents a meaningful pattern within the species as a whole. It was, by Bureau standards, an unusually direct piece of writing, and I know that because I wrote every word of it myself, checked 3 times over so the translation software could not soften a single sentence. 6 months after that first quiet, tense morning in the review chamber, I returned to the same room where Ochu had first said the word fake, without even needing to look twice at the screen. This time I brought new footage, not of drones or sliding vehicles, but of something smaller, and, in its own way, more telling. A recording from a routine joint patrol along a shared border zone, showing a human engineer named Henry stepping without hesitation into a collapsed maintenance tunnel to reach one of our own people, a young Vantral technician trapped under fallen equipment after an unrelated structural failure. Henry had no reason to know the technician personally. Our 2 species had barely been trading routine communications for half a cycle at that point, and yet the footage showed him working for nearly 20 minutes, in a space that was still actively settling and unsafe, talking steadily the entire time in a calm voice the technician later described, through a translator, as the only reason she had stayed conscious long enough to be freed. I played that clip for the same committee that had once dismissed the very idea of human sacrifice as an obvious fabrication. Nobody reached for the word fake this time. Nobody needed to zoom in to be convinced. We had already learned, slowly and at real cost to people like Grace and the man on the ridge whose name I still keep in my private records out of a kind of respect I cannot fully explain, that this was simply what some humans did when someone nearby needed them, whether that someone shared their species or not. I do not lead threat assessments anymore. I spend most of my time now helping new liaison staff understand what I learned the hard way, over one impossible video and then a second one and then dozens more after that. I tell them what Ochu told me, on the night we finally stopped arguing about whether the first clip was real. I tell them that humans are not simply strong, or simply brave, though they are often both. I tell them that somewhere in how they are built, action comes before fear finishes asking its questions, and that this single quiet fact, changed how an entire alliance of species chose to think about the newest, youngest, strangest neighbors we had ever welcomed across the border. Whenever a new analyst brings me footage they are certain must be false, footage of some ordinary human doing something that defies every reasonable model we have for what a body should be willing to survive, I no longer tell them to run the numbers again, or to check the compression artifacts, or to search for the seam that will prove it fabricated. I simply tell them to zoom in, and to keep watching until the silence in the room tells them everything the footage already has.